Hello, everyone. Welcome. Whoa, what a perfect day. What a perfect day. Tiffany, thank you and your team for organizing this on International Women's Day. Watching this documentary, Picture a Scientist, was both personally painful, quietly and reflectingly devastating. Yet, I have to say, I am personally empowered by this compelling message. This movie and what our discussion's about today is not to point fingers at our male or female counterparts, as we all have allies in each domain who serve as our balcony people, cheering us on. But this documentary and discussion is to help us confront our own inner biases, our prejudice, and to accept the pivotal role that each of us can play in making rapid progress towards equality. One thing for sure, we can no longer ignore the disparity. I hope every person on this call, and you got all your friends, your professors, teachers, staff, students, to take time to view this, to understand implicit bias and the systemic bias. We can do so much more, and I just love our university and what it's trying to do to bring equality to women. Last week, and Bruce Mal spoke, and Balsamo got him to speak to us, and he's someone that I'm working with who is a big international design thinker. And one of the questions he was asked is, Bruce, why can't we design a culture that can accept all people? And what he said was, I think we are in a compassion crisis. Whoa, that really resonated with me. If we had compassion for every single person around us, wherever they walk in life, whatever they represent, wouldn't that make a difference? Just imagine if each of us did courageous acts of compassion every single day. What if we designed our university culture, one that treats all around us with respect, with dignity, and opportunity to harness our personal potential, regardless of gender, sexual orientation, ethnicity, race, religion, age, disability, economic class, and more. What a great discussion we've had, and you'll see a talented gift of panelists. I now have the pleasure to introduce Jacqueline Prince. You'll immediately see why she was chosen to be our gifted moderator. She's a diversity, equity, and belonging professional who specializes in gender equity. I love that she works through the lens of intersectional feminism because we're no longer binary, one thing or the other, but many-faceted. She helps to educate, advocate, and provide programs for our communities, so thank you for joining us today. She's particularly passionate about teaching us and showing us how to maximize the privilege we've been given to inspire others to be the most they can be. Jacqueline, it's all yours. Please join me in welcoming Jacqueline Pritz.
Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you, Dr. Chapman, for that wonderful introduction, and a big thank you to the Office of Research, to the School of Interdisciplinary Studies, to the Women's ERG, and then to my colleagues in the Galerstein Gender Center for making this possible and to prioritizing all of these voices on campus. It is truly an honor to spend this time with you and to explore this topic in particular. As shared, my name is Jacqueline. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am excited to dig right into things. I very called by metaphors and analogies and things like that. And so as the Assistant Director for Women's and Gender Equity Programs, I was very pulled towards the metaphor in the film in regard to the iceberg and looking at sexual harassment as an iceberg, and that the things that we see on top, we can maybe name as being atrocious and to be addressed, but the things below the surface being a little bit harder to name or recognize. And so I couldn't be more grateful for this opportunity to dig deeper into the sea, into the glacier, and do some more education. And then, as Dr. Chapman beautifully outlined, pull on people's compassion, and maybe use those two things, education and compassion, to address what we're seeing. So without further ado, and blathering on by me, we will get to our first question, which will go to Dean Stephanie G. Adams, who is the 5th Dean of the Eric Jonsson School of Engineering and Computer Science at the University of Texas, Dallas, and past president of the American Society of Engineering Education. Previously, Dr. Adams served as the dean of the Frank Batten College of Engineering and Technology at Old Dominion University. That was from 2016 to 2018. Department head and professor of engineering education at Virginia Tech, and held faculty and administrative positions at Virginia Commonwealth University and the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Her research interests include broadening participation, faculty and graduate student development, international global education, teamwork and team effectiveness, and quality control and management. In 2003, she received the Career Award from the Engineering Education and Centers Division of the National Science Foundation. Dr. Adams is a leader in the advancement and inclusion of all in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education. She has worked with a number of colleges and universities, government agencies, and nonprofit organizations on topics related to graduate education, mentoring, faculty development, and diversifying STEM. Dr. Adams is an honor graduate of North Carolina A&T State University, where she earned her BS in mechanical engineering in 1988. In 1981, she was awarded the Master of Engineering degree in Systems Engineering from the University of Virginia. She received her PhD in Interdisciplinary Engineering from Texas A&M University in 1998, where she concentrated on industrial engineering and management. So you can see why we might want to have Dean Adams answer our very first question, which is, Dean Adams, how can we make science more inclusive and increase diversity within the fields?
So thank you, Jacqueline, and thanks to the organizers for bringing us together on this glorious Women's Day. It's International Women's Day, and it's nice that it's so sunny outside. So in order to answer this question, and I'm gonna rephrase it just a little bit about, I want to say, how can we make STEM more inclusive? Because it's everybody, not just the scientists. I think you first have to understand why people are absent, right? And there's been lots of reports written about this, and I tried to parse it out into 4 main areas: historical, social, cultural, and environmental. And so I think those are the reasons why we need to address the historical aspects of these things to make folks more inclusive. So what has happened historically, and I think you saw this in the movie, in the activity where the professor put up the slide and said, say right or left, if it was a male or a woman, and she had like scientist and engineer, and she had some names and different things. And so very early on, people have decided what a scientist looks like. And oftentimes it doesn't look like people that look like me. They're not women, they're not people of color. And so history sort of dictated to some extent who people saw as scientists. Socially, we often say that scientists, particularly if you're a woman scientist, you must somehow be more masculine than feminine. And that's a societal norm around how people see folks in science and engineering. The cultural piece, again, who's allowed to be at the table and who's not, and then the environment. Now, how that trickles down is that girls early on and people of color early on have been led to think that they're not equipped to be a scientific, technological engineer, mathematician. And so therefore we don't go into those professions. We don't see people who look like us. There's been a lot of research written around girls who go into STEM disciplines oftentimes are influenced by a family member who was a STEM person, or they were early on exposed. And so I think that's it. But as early on in the K through 12 space, oftentimes teachers are ill prepared to teach certain subjects. And so again, you're ill prepared, and then you get ready to go to high school, and now you haven't had some of the preparatory courses that folks need. So in order to start making science more inclusive, we've got to go back and address some of those, right? So we need to have, more role models. We need to encourage girls and kids of color very early on that math can be for you. And I found a quote that I wanted to share on this occasion, and it said, "The foundation for a STEM career is laid early in life, but scientists and engineers are made in colleges and universities." But if I haven't had the right mathematics in the K through 12 space, I'm not going to be encouraged at the collegiate level to think about that. We also know that ability. So there's another study that says that women will not apply for a job where they meet 9 out of 10 points that are listed in the job description, whereas men will apply if they only meet 1. So we have learned to self-assess ourselves away from science and engineering. So what we can be doing about those things is being broader, right? Is being more inclusive in the programs that we offer. I'm sitting on the board now for Black Girls Code. And the whole reason Black Girls Code got started was the founder, who's an engineer, sent her daughter, who was then 11, to a coding camp at Stanford. And she was the only girl and the only woman of color. And so she came home very, demotivated to go into computing as a discipline. And Kimberly was like, I have to do something for my child. So she created Black Girls Code. And so we need to be able to see people in those places very early on. And the statistics say that in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th grade, from an achievement perspective, there is no difference amongst women or people of color. And so if we want to have more people, we need to continue to track them into math, and really math should be genderless. It's just, either you have, and I'm not even gonna say you have the aptitude, because I think you learn the aptitude. So if we want to talk about how we can make STEM more inclusive and diverse, I think we do have to go back and tackle some of those historical, societal, cultural, and environmental factors that have systematically moved people away from STEM backgrounds and fields.
Thank you so much, Dean Adams, for sharing all of that wisdom and insight. It really brings me to think about Dr. Rachel Burks in the film, and who identified as a woman of color, a Black woman in science. And I remember her saying that that's part of why she felt compelled to be so visible and to try to be the scientist that she didn't get to see as she was going through her own education. And so I think that that is echoed throughout the film, absolutely. So thank you so much. We have our next question that will be for Dean Jennifer Holmes. Dr. Jennifer S. Holmes is the Dean of the School of Economic, Political, and Policy Sciences, at the University of Texas at Dallas. She received her AB from the University of Chicago and her PhD from the University of Minnesota. Her major area of research is political violence and terrorism, with an emphasis on Latin America, especially Colombia and Peru. In addition to numerous journal articles, she's the author or editor of 7 books, including Guns, Drugs, and Development in Colombia from University of Texas Press in 2008, Terrorism and Democratic Stability Revisited, Immigration Judges and U.S. Asylum Policy, and Latin American Democracy, Emerging Reality or Endangered Species. Her ongoing research in Colombia continues in 4 areas: the landscape ecology of conflict and post-conflict, protection of critical infrastructures, urban quality of life, and the creation of real-time event data on political and social events in Latin America. So again, it may not surprise you that we would absolutely want to engage with Dean Holmes and ask this next question, which is, Dean Holmes, we heard from many scientists within the film, sharing their own experiences with being, minimized, devalued, etc. Again, referring back to the glacier below the surface kind of things. And so I'm wondering, have there been times when your ideas have been talked over and dismissed because you're a woman? And if so, how did you deal with it? How should you approach those kinds of situations in regard to sexual harassment? And how do you approach sexual harassment situation at the university level?
Well, I'll start with the first one anyway. I mean, I think most professional women have been in situations more times than we care to count, where we say something in a meeting and just it's like you haven't spoken. Somebody ignores you, or even worse, a man will say basically what you said, and then all of a sudden it will be heard. It's a troubling pattern for sure. And I would say there are a couple of strategies, I think, to handle that. I was reading the Harvard Business Review had a piece out a couple of years ago, and they said one strategy is you do have a pre-meeting chat where you kind of strategize about issues you want to address and bring up, and you do a little bit of agenda setting, a little bit of chatting with fellow attendees beforehand. That's one way. I would say one thing I do, and I correct this of my students if I see them do that. The worst thing you can do in a meeting is be mousy, right? And speak quietly. I absolutely can't stand it when people talk and they do that up at the end of a sentence. It's awful. It's almost just begging to be ignored. So you want to speak up. You want to speak clearly, maintain eye contact. If someone tries to interrupt you, I mean, you can say, I'm not done yet, right? Just hold on, I have finished my point. So I think you definitely need to be assertive without being abrasive. And of course, women often are viewed as abrasive or other words that people will use if you're assertive. But I do think that confidence and assertiveness is something that it's necessary to make sure you're heard. And this movie points out, some of these issues are still so pervasive. In the Obama White House, it was noted that women would say things in meetings and it just wouldn't be heard, right? And so they actually did start kind of a proactive, they did some training, but they also would have kind of allies in the meeting say, well, as Stephanie said here, let's, and reiterate the point, so you can engage some allies. So I think that's a series of strategies in that situation. Now, in terms of the sexual harassment situation, there's luckily we have a whole legal structure now, and I think we have some references at the end, but definitely Title IX, there's all sorts of things. It's very important to document these things as best you can. Now, you know, I do have one friend of mine from graduate school who did have some unfortunate interactions that, you know, things did not resolve in a way that we would expect it to. So I think the more you can document and you know, be assertive for yourself, you have to advocate for yourself.
And thank you very much, Dean Holmes, for sharing that information with our audience. The next question we have is for Dr. Nikki Delk. Dr. Delk is an associate professor in biological sciences, an endowed Cecil H. and Ida Green professor in systems biology science at the University of Texas at Dallas, and recently named in the Cell Press list of 1,000 inspiring Black scientists in America. Her lab studies inflammation-induced breast and prostate cancer progression and treatment resistance, and her research is supported by funding from UT Dallas, National Cancer Institute, and the American Cancer Society. After receiving her bachelor's in math from Georgetown University, she was commissioned as an Air Force officer where she served for 4 years before obtaining her doctorate in molecular biology from Rice University. She obtained a doctorate in order to pursue her childhood dream to be a cancer biologist in honor of her grandmother who passed away from cancer. She was a postdoctoral fellow at MD Anderson Cancer Center and a postdoctoral and faculty fellow at Rice University before joining the faculty at UT Dallas in 2014. Dr. Delk, do you know of women who have been forced out of the science field? And if so, why did they leave? What could have been done differently to encourage retention?
I do want to first piggyback off of Dean Holmes's statements about sexual harassment. And so in the movie, sexual harassment was an issue that did drive one of the subjects of the movie out of science. And so while I fortunately do not know anyone who has been driven out of science because of sexual harassment, as you mentioned, I'm prior military, and having myself experienced sexual harassment in the military when I became a scientist, it did inform who would be my mentors. So I was very deliberate about making sure that my mentors and my advisors and bosses were female to avoid that situation. But one issue that I do see in terms of something that has driven women out of science, or alternatively, if not driving them out of science, plateauing their career, has been family commitment, having children, having spouses. And so the burden, unfortunately, culturally in our society is placed on women. We bear the crux of the burden when it comes to taking care of our families, whether it's taking care of aging parents or having children, taking care of your children. And so one of the things that our field needs to do is to evolve. It shouldn't be the burden on the woman, to have to conform their lifestyle for their field, but we as the field need to evolve. So for example, having meetings during times that are appropriate so that if someone has to pick their kids up from school, they're not having to miss the meeting because they have to go pick their kids up from school. When we think about family leave, for example, making sure that department heads are being respectful of that family time and that family leave time, and not still sending emails to the person that's on family leave giving them work to do. And also like not taking responsibilities away. That's something that has happened to colleagues of mine when they do go on family leave. Coming back and responsibilities have been taken away from them because they were gone on family leave. So I think just making sure that we as a field start to be more inclusive and that we evolve to include people that do have family commitments. The other thing that I've seen too that has been has put a plateau on some of my colleagues' careers has been geographical burdens, or if you will, and so for example, having spouses, I have friends that have spouses that have a career in a certain area and they're not able to leave. So the woman cannot leave is not able to leave and go to another institution at another place to increase her career trajectory, because she does need to stay where her husband has his career. So that happens a lot too. So not just also having to take on a majority of the responsibility when it comes to taking care of children, but also having to acquiesce to your spouse's career. So one of the things that can also be done that we can do and evolve as a field is the idea of making sure that if we do want to recruit women to our institution, for example, that you do take into consideration that they have a spouse that has a career, and making sure that you're helping that person, that woman that you're trying to recruit to that institution, making sure that you look to see if you can help their spouse find a career, so that that family is more willing to move to that institution that may allow that woman to increase her trajectory in her career.
Hello, Dr. Delk. I couldn't be more grateful for how you've so beautifully outlined the need for what sounds like a little bit more flexibility and creativity when it comes to supervision, and it comes to how we structure our workplaces or our virtual workspaces. It has a direct, I think, connection for myself. As some might notice, I have a little one that I am currently feeding right now. And so you know, I can imagine how there are absolutely connections, you know, made like this all over the place for others. And it also, you know, I guess it really makes me think about how there's been a direct negative impact even further since the pandemic has begun, and how I believe just nationwide, the number was something like 2 million women have left the workforce. And that's not necessarily science specific, but I can definitely understand that there are that field would also be included in that number, and that productivity for women in sciences is lower. Women in STEM is lower as well since the pandemic, and needing to navigate childcare challenges and things like that because of the imbalanced domestic labor that you've so beautifully outlined. That's definitely something that in the Gender Center we feel passionate about, not just having conversations and raising awareness, but also helping people brainstorm what's possible. Because I think that that's part of, you know, going back to what we initially were talking about, you know, this being twofold, it being about you know, education and representation and all of that stuff to help with this issue. We'd like to help educate on this particular issue because it so deeply affects many people and many women scientists. So thank you so much for that beautiful answer. I believe we have another question.
And I'm happy to help you out there, not a problem. So the next speaker that we have is Sumdata Chakraborty. Sumdata Chakraborty is an international PhD student currently in the bioengineering department at UTD. She came to the U.S. to pursue her master's in bioengineering in 2010. After receiving her master's in science in 2012, she worked at the Cavans, working with business users to develop the back end of client-facing clinical trial data reporting system. She returned to academia in 2017, and this time to pursue her PhD. Somduta, why is there gender bias in the science community? Is there a way to change this bias?
Thank you, Tiffany. First of all, I am really grateful for this opportunity to be on this amazing panel alongside Dean Adams, Dean Holmes, Dr. Delk on International Women's Day, talking about these really pressing issues that at some level we all face in our professional lives. Talking about bias, something that Dean Adams said up front, that it's so historically ingrained that we, even without being actively taught, we assign roles and duties based on the gender. And like we've seen in the movie, how people associate gender with their activities. Something that I personally experienced in coming from India, where when anyone's pursuing higher competitive education, the mindset is that women are most suited for professions like becoming a doctor, whereas the men and the boys, they are more encouraged to go into fields of engineering. In my case, my dad's a chemical engineer by profession. And again, something that Dean Adams said, once you've historically seen a member of your family be in that profession, you're most likely to be interested to pursue STEM. And that's what happened to me. But again, some sort of a bias crept into that, where I was convinced that maybe a profession like bioengineering, which not only had engineering, but also was more tuned towards biological sciences, was somewhere like a middle ground for a woman, right? So despite of that, I'm grateful for the field that I pursued. It might have been a circuitous route to get there, and like something that's it's sort of bias that led towards that. But I think where I am now, and I've been in the US in the professional field for about 10 years now, and I can see that from my own experiences that there have been efforts to try and get over this or remove this bias. We've made great inroads, but there's so much work to do, right? And one thing that I can think of in getting over this bias is that earlier I used to think that, oh, I'm just a grad student, what can I do, or how much effect can I bring about? But but now if I was to see a student that I'm mentoring and they experience some sort of gender-based differentiation or a difference in behavior from their colleague, I'm more than willing to step up and correct that right there. I think it fortunately or unfortunately falls to all of us to make those changes. And again, we cannot attain a great amount of reform without involving our allies, and we have to put some of that responsibility on our allies. And I think days like this, International Women's Day, it's great to celebrate all this amazing accomplishment that women have made, but it's also an opportunity for women and our allies to take stock of what has been achieved in the past year, to make, refresh your commitments and set goals for the coming year.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing your experience, Samdata. You know, I have to do a shameless plug for the Gender Center. It just from what you've shared, that this kind of call to action for allies to help improve the culture and dynamics. We actually have a training that comes out of the Gender Center called Culture of Equity that works to help educate and empower people who would like to be champions of gender equity on campus and beyond. And so sometimes we get the question from people, how does this relate to me? And I think we can tell from everything that's been shared from our wonderful panelists that this kind of education is so crucial and necessary. So thank you for sharing that. We did have a question come in from one of our attendees that asks a question for Dean Adams and Dean Holmes. And I believe that Dean Adams will be responding first. Are you facing unique challenges as a leader? Does power in the workplace put women at greater risk to face gender bias?
So thank you for that question. So anybody who knows me knows that I believe in speaking truth to power. So I'm going to honestly say the answer to this question is yes, but not at UT Dallas. So UT Dallas has been a breath of fresh air for me. As Jacqueline introduced me, she shared that I had spent 3 years at Old Dominion University. And I would say a large part of the reason that I'm no longer there is because I did run into some gender bias. The university touted diversity and, you know, all these great things, but at the end of the day, I don't think the faculty was ready for a woman and a woman of color leader. I don't think I got the support from upper administration in the way that I needed to see it. So if you were to talk to some of the upper administrations, they would say, oh yes, we completely support Stephanie. And we had to have conversations where I said to them, well, I'm not sure what your definition of support looks like, but it doesn't manifest itself in the way that I feel supported. And it got to a point where I actually did step down before I even got the job at UT Dallas, because I was just not going to be continued to be put upon in that way and constantly challenged, not because of the things that I was trying to do, but because of who I was. And so you might wonder, well, how do you discern the difference? And so couple data points. You don't always get the answers at the time that you need them, but as time has gone on, several of the things that I was asked to try to do to make change at Old Dominion were some of the exact things that I've been faced with at UT Dallas. So we needed to have a new workload policy at Old Dominion. We had to have a workload policy at UT Dallas. I needed to do some things with the budget and finance at Old Dominion, and I've had to do some things here. And, you know, I did learn some things from the time, but I'm approaching it pretty much the same. And the response at UT Dallas has been phenomenal to some of those ideas and such that were not the case there. So, yeah, I have experienced it, and it can be horrifying because it had never actually happened to me before. So, I mean, I've been a woman of color leader. This is my 17th year as university administrator. So that means I was probably at year 13 or 14 by the time I got to Old Dominion. And I'd never been challenged, questioned, faced with the kind of bias that I did. And I'm being honest, that's the only thing I can do. So that's my answer to the question. Thank you for whoever asked it.
Well, like Dean Adams, you know, I've been very fortunate at UT Dallas, but there are some, you know, some instances that like, for example, there was a visiting international scholar who came up to the dean suite, and literally when the my staff said, well, this is Dean Holmes, he dropped his jaw and just was like, no, she can't be the dean. And, you know, I don't know if it's because I'm fortunate to look a little younger than I am, or if it was a gendered thing, but this visiting faculty member just could not really come to terms with the fact that I was the dean, right? I didn't fit the stereotype. Not an old white guy with a bow tie, right? So that has happened. I think a lot of women, faculty in general, we get students and others who will not use the title, right? So we'll be Miss or Mrs. as opposed to professor or doctor or dean more frequently. But that's the extent to it. So in terms of that iceberg, nothing at that tip of the iceberg, thank goodness. But you do see some of the subtleties that some of us get a little bit different interactions. But I've been fortunate, I started here as a visiting assistant professor in 1998 and then came through the ranks and then went into administration. So I have long-standing relationships with my colleagues. And so, I've been very fortunate and we've had very good practice here. I mean, just one thing in terms of, I know some of the questions, I've tried to be very, very conscientious when I'm hiring faculty where the women are paid the same as the men. So I'll go back and make sure, and the provost has been excellent at making sure that's the case. And I'm also trying to be very mindful of office space as well. So if I have, a couple of offices available, I give the nicer one to, if I have an underrepresented scholar, happy to give them the nicer office space or the woman, but I do try to make sure that we don't have other things go on. But yeah, I chuckle when I think back to that visiting scholar who literally just was aghast that I was introduced as the dean, but thankfully that's pretty mild.
Thank you so much, Dean Holmes and Dean Adams, for sharing your experiences. Dean Adams, you're sharing your experiences reminds me of the professor in the film who did that activity, did that test of assigning man, woman, career, family, etc. And at the end of it, of her interview, she said, at this point, it goes against the science to say that it doesn't exist, that this kind of bias doesn't exist. We have substantial evidence that it does. And so if you are going based off of your, I know, buddy, I don't like sexism either. If you are going based off of your experiences alone, that is not very scientific. That wouldn't be something that you applied to anything else. And that really was powerful for me. So I heard that absolutely in your response, Dean Adams, and how in one space you can absolutely experience something, and then in another it'd be a completely different one. And I was so excited to hear about your experience at UT. Dean Holmes, I also was prompted by your share, especially about space and salary, thinking in the film about how one of the women scientists went throughout all of the lab space and actually did measurements of all of the lab space to highlight the inequity, and it still wasn't, really absorbed. And so I heard in your example how, that is something that you actively think about in terms of trying to keep even the workspaces equitable, not just the opportunities. So wonderful. We did have a couple of questions come in surrounding how one approaches sexual harassment in the classroom or in the workspace, essentially. And so just going in to one in particular, it says, many years ago, as a female undergraduate chemical engineering student, I experienced extensive harassment from a male professor. It involved put downs and public embarrassment. so again, below the surface iceberg situation. My fellow classmates kept quiet during these public incidents, possibly out of fear of receiving a bad grade in the course. How can we as women be bold and support one another when we encounter this type of mistreatment? I do feel curious, again, trying to tie it back to the film more specifically, what your thoughts, and this could go to anyone who feels called to answer, about the dynamic that currently exists about needing to rely on mentors and faculty members for advancement. So the way that things are set up now, and how that may have a direct impact on how someone may or may not speak up. And then again, this question asks, how can we as women be bold and support one another? But I also am curious about ways in which you know, their men classmates can assist and empower and be champions of them as well. So I wanted to put that question out to anyone who would like to answer.
Jacqueline, I can speak to that somewhat. So I get that if this kind of put down happens in a public setting, you're taking that same class, obviously you wouldn't want to react in a way that jeopardizes your own situation, but we know that staying silent in a situation where something's obviously wrong is wrong in itself. So I think what those who are afraid or fearful of their situation, if you make yourself visible to the person who's suffering that, just go up to them, ask that, or clarify your stance with them that what's happening to you is absolutely wrong. What can I do to help? And then maybe you can be the one in support of them, trying to find out resources where they can anonymously report this situation, or you can anonymously report on their behalf so that they don't get the backlash of what they're facing and things like that. So there's definitely things that you can do to support, and having that anonymity, if you're fearful of your own situation and your own progress, I think that is somewhat required.
Wonderful, Sandra. I really appreciate all of what you said, but specifically what you said about checking in with the person experiencing the harm. I saw what happened to you, so validating, their experience, but then saying, what would you like to happen? Because again, y'all, I just really loved this film so much. I can't help but think about it in all the answers that I've heard so far today. But I remember, there were some people that were very active in wanting to address these things and wanting to be very vocal. But then there were some women who in the film said, I didn't want to be an activist. I didn't want to, stand out or, make a fuss. I just wanted to do science. And so I do think that in itself can be very empowering to just check in with the person and see what they would like to have happen. So I couldn't appreciate what you shared more. And it reminds me of Dr. Chapman's call for compassion, and how, we are currently in a crisis of compassion. And Sandra, I heard compassion all over your response. So thank you.
Actually, Jacqueline, can I? It's interesting that you say that about people not wanting to. I didn't catch that point in the movie. When you watch things, you miss some things that somebody else sees. But about people not wanting to speak up. And, you know, for me as a woman of color, I never wanted to be defined as the woman of color doing the advocacy work, right? I mean, you always hear, don't get pigeonholed, don't, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the thing that really got me thinking about this differently was in 2005, I came across the statistic that there were only 96 Black women engineering professors in the country. And I was like, surely that's wrong. Like 96, and it's 2005 out of like 20,000+. And the number is now up to 150 since 2005. But it's like, if I'm not, with my platform, if I'm not advocating, then who is? So you sort of get pushed into the limelight, right? By, you know, I just wanted to be an engineer. And it's all, you know, and then I decided I wanted to teach engineering. I didn't want to be an advocate, but I think now we need everybody to be an advocate if we're really going to start changing, or as Gandhi says, you know, be the change that you want to see, right? I mean, we have to start stepping up and sticking our neck out a little bit.
Yes, I don't know if anyone else is feeling really fired up, but thank you so much, Dean Holmes, or excuse me, Dean Adams. I feel very fired up from that response that, you know, that at a certain point, it really, you know, whether you want it to come knocking on your door or not, sometimes it will come knocking. And so being prepared to answer, it can be really helpful, probably not just on your career, but on your on like your personhood and mental health, etc. I think about the I'm sorry, I forget the name of the particular. It was the chemist in the film who shared that she was reflecting on all the time that she spent trying to answer emails and you know, communication and meetings in ways that would be perceived as okay and wouldn't code her kind of as the angry Black woman. And after a while, she realized, you know what, I'm gonna wear my hair the way I want to, the clothes that make me feel affirmed, etc. You know, so I feel fired up, and I hope others do as well. We have another question that came in for Dean Holmes. Do you think we should be teaching women to speak with confidence and be somewhat aggressive to be heard? Or should we focus our energies on teaching men to listen no matter what tone a woman takes? I think this might be in reference to what you shared about women who speak with upspeak to sound more appealing and nice and soften what we say. Great question.
You know, I think we probably need to do both. I mean, you know, I know my husband and I watched this movie together, and he had a late aunt who actually was driven out of academic medicine and practicing of medicine because the pervasive sexism that she faced. She was one of 4 women to graduate from her med school, and she ended up going back and working for Eli Lilly and doing some work on adverse drug effects, but she basically was driven out because how sexist it was. I mean, I think we do need to have women be assertive. I mean, this is a funny story, but it's true. So in high school, I was voted most likely to stay single. And I think it's because, you know, I was always a little assertive, and yeah, you're right, there's some consequences to that. But that being said, I think women do need to assert themselves and be more confident. I hate it when students preface a question with, well, I know this is a stupid question. No, don't do that to yourself. You're undermining yourself. Now, of course, I think, you know, we all could use continued training, and you know, the bias is pervasive, and it's good people who have good values, they just don't see that they have that, right? So I think we do need to work on each other a little bit, and some more training. And you know, I think the things that come out of your center as well, we all need some work on that. But women really do need to do need to be more assertive. And, you know, just for the record, I actually have been married twice. So take that or no high school, right? But yeah, you know, being assertive sometimes has a little bit of consequence, but I think that's fine. You just have to move forward with it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dean Holmes. I'm wondering if, you know, that kind of mentorship and education for young girls and young women could be in tandem with some of the, you know, STEM recruitment efforts, you know, because some of this is taught so young, so early, you know, that the consequences that you outlined, Dean Holmes, for women in in professional positions now, have upspeak, apologize a lot, and things like that, probably because as they grew up, the consequences were really steep, that they were learning from friends, families, teachers, you know, in the classroom. And so we're seeing really a product of a lifetime of, you know, of that consequence. So I wonder if those two things can work in tandem. As we're working on recruitment efforts, we're also, you know, teaching them some of these skills that, you know, being able to say, I'm a leader, and say that with a period rather than a question mark. I love it. All right. We have just a few minutes left. I can't believe it. This has been so wonderful. I would like to ask, I believe we may have time for one more question. And that question will be for anyone who feels comfortable responding. Senior women are more willing to speak out and step up. How can we improve things for the junior faculty women or junior early career individuals?
So I'd like to address this. So what I would add to this is mentorship is really important. That's been pinnacle in my career success, is having great mentors. And so as someone who just got tenure, so was recently a junior faculty member, I would say one of the things that has separated me from some of my peers, as I was saying earlier, that did reach a plateau in their career, was the fact that I have such great mentors. All senior women in the field, all full professors who anytime I've had an issue or a problem, I can text them, I can call them, I can email them. And so I would say mentorship has been really important.
Thank you so much, Dr. Delk. I think that call for mentorship is a beautiful note to kind of close our time together on. And something that I've heard from many people across different fields is that mentorship doesn't stop after college. And I think that was wonderful in your example, Dr. Delk, that you know, no matter your level, you can still have a mentor, but then you can also start being a mentor, which is really powerful and special. So with that being said, I believe that concludes our event for today. Thank you all so much for the brilliant, you know, bits of wisdom that have been shared. I hope that you go forth on this International Women's Day and feel empowered and feel just very confident moving forward in your journey. Thank you.
So let me close and say, wow, oh my goodness. I hope every one of us feel empowered of what we can do. I know when scientists come visit the Center for Brain Health, one of the things that they're most struck by is how many females are in leadership positions. If you see a neuroscience center, typically, even if there's just 10% men, there's a man at the top. And for them to see 90% women, they're blown away. I hope that we will take up this challenge. I'm so grateful, Dean Adams, Dean Holmes, Dr. Delk, wow, Samdata, and Jacqueline. Thank you for sharing your experiences and stretching us to be, you all are powerful change makers, and I'm inspired by what you're saying. You know, when I think about how we can treat people with respect and dignity through this lens of intersectional feminism that so many of us carry forward, I think about the difference between a waterfall effect. When someone's hurt, they hurt so many people downstream, and how it hurts so many. But when we help someone and listen with compassion, the ripple effect of having such greater reach to inspire people to be the most they can be. As we take up this challenge to overcome this compassion crisis, to help all of those in our midst. And a very special thank you, Tiffany. Wow, you always do the best events. Suzanne Head, Anika, the School of Interdisciplinary Studies, the Office of Research, the Galerstein Gender Center, the Women's Employee Resource Group for your collaborative efforts. I'm so proud of our university. I hope each of you in your sphere of influence will develop little groups to see how we can do so much more on this International Women's Day to start a spark. And the audience, I hope each of you will find ways that you can make a difference to the women around you, to the men around you, so that this task is daunting. But what if we have a whole culture around our university that celebrates what we can become? I know Tiffany's going to send out a rating, how beneficial this was. I hope you'll fill it out, because that's how we learn how to do it. Let's all go be compassionate change makers. Picture a scientist. And wouldn't it be nice to picture everyone on this panel when you think of it first? Thank you for joining us today. Bye.